I've always lived in the shadow of my father. No matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough for him. My efforts were always brushed off, my achievements barely acknowledged, as if I was just another face in the crowd. But it wasn't just about getting his approval, it was about being seen, about feeling like I mattered. But to him, I was invisible. I remember being a kid, showing him my school report cards with all A's. Instead of praise, he'd just grunt and say, "Good, but don't get too cocky." It was always the same. I could win a trophy, get a perfect score in a game, or land a great job opportunity, but none of it would ever be enough. He had this way of looking at me like I was nothing special, like my success was just luck or a mere coincidence. But then there was my older brother, Aaron. He was everything Dad wanted. Handsome, athletic, charming, a natural-born leader. Dad always had time for him, always made him feel like he was the future. I saw it every day, how Dad would light up when Aaron walked into the room, how Aaron could do no wrong in his eyes. It was like I wasn't even in the same family sometimes. Aaron never had to try as hard as I did to get Dad's attention. All he had to do was exist. But it wasn't until a particular event that things started to shift, and I realized something shocking. My father, the man I had spent my whole life trying to impress, didn't see me at all. He wasn't just neglecting me, he was actively pushing me aside. I had spent years thinking if I worked harder, proved myself more, he'd come around. But one night, I discovered something that completely shattered that hope. I overheard a conversation between him and Aaron. At first, it was just background noise while I was making dinner in the next room. But then, I heard Dad say something that made my blood run cold. "You're going to take over the business. You're my legacy. Forget about her. She doesn't have what it takes." The words hit me like a slap in the face. I froze. It wasn't even the words themselves, but the certainty in his voice, the way he so easily dismissed me without hesitation. All my hard work, all my sacrifices, and none of it even mattered to him. I wasn't just overlooked, I was actively erased. And in that moment, I realized something. If I wanted to be seen, if I wanted my efforts to count, I would have to take matters into my own hands. But how? How could I show him I wasn't just another background character in his life? The answer came to me slowly, but with an intensity I hadn't felt in years. I was done being ignored. I was done trying to gain his approval. It was time to do something that would make him take notice, something that would make him regret every moment he spent dismissing me. But what was the best way to get the spotlight back? Growing up, I never questioned my father's behavior at first. When you're a kid, you just think that's how things are. You do your best, and eventually your parents will recognize your efforts. But as the years went by, I started to notice the subtle ways in which my father's love and attention were divided. And it was always in Aaron's favor. Aaron was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. I remember how Dad would take him out fishing on weekends, just the two of them, while I stayed home to do chores or study. I'd ask if I could go along, but Dad would always say, "This is for men, kid." And I didn't get it at the time. I wanted to bond with him, wanted to be a part of whatever it was they had, but he never made space for me. Meanwhile, Aaron thrived in everything Dad loved. He was athletic, charming, and incredibly social. Everything Dad had hoped to be at that age. They'd sit up late at night, talking about business strategies, future plans. It was like Aaron had inherited the family business before he even graduated high school. In the eyes of Dad, he was the heir to everything. And me? I was just there. But here's the thing. I wasn't without my own strengths. I excelled in school, always getting top grades, winning awards, and participating in volunteer work. I was driven. But none of that seemed to matter to Dad. Instead of seeing me as someone who was shaping up to be independent and successful in my own right, he saw me as a shadow of Aaron, a mere filler in a family that didn't need me. I started to get tired of it, tired of working hard for approval that never came. But the tipping point came when I applied for an internship at one of the biggest firms in the city, a company Dad had worked with for years. I had been networking, sending emails, and doing everything right. Finally, after months of preparation, I got an interview. It was a huge opportunity. If I got it, I knew it could be my big break. The day I received the email saying I'd been selected for the interview, I was ecstatic. I wanted to share the news with Dad, hoping he'd at least acknowledge my hard work. But when I told him, he didn't even look up from his paper. "That's nice, kid," he said, barely glancing in my direction. "But Aaron's got a big project coming up with the firm, too. He'll probably be involved in a lot of the decisions." I tried not to let the bitterness show, but deep down, I was furious. Why was Aaron always at the center of things? Why couldn't I get the same level of recognition? It wasn't just about the internship, it was about everything I had worked for being overshadowed by someone else's expectations. Then, there was the family business. It wasn't like I wasn't involved at all. Dad had always told me I should learn the ropes, so I'd spend evenings at the office, sitting quietly, organizing papers, doing menial tasks while Aaron sat at the big table, discussing plans and shaking hands with clients. There was a subtle but undeniable message being sent. I wasn't cut out for leadership. I wasn't cut out for the role he had set aside for Aaron, no matter how hard I tried. As I became more aware of the growing gap between us, it was impossible not to feel resentment. The truth was, Dad didn't need me. He already had his successor, his chosen one. It didn't matter if I was capable or talented. I was just there to fill in the gaps. His indifference to me, to everything I had accomplished, cut deeper than I realized. But the final blow came one day when Aaron announced his plans to take over the company after Dad retired. At the dinner table, Dad casually mentioned that he had already made arrangements for Aaron to take the reins. There was no mention of me. It wasn't even up for discussion. I couldn't even bring myself to be angry. It was like a punch that had been building up for years, and when it finally landed, there was no fight left in me. I remember sitting there, my plate untouched, as Dad and Aaron laughed about the future, making plans like everything was already decided. And it was then that the realization hit me. This was never my place. This was never my future. I wasn't going to be a part of their world. But here's the thing, I wasn't going to let it end like this. I refused to be the invisible daughter, the one who worked hard only to be cast aside. I didn't need Dad's approval. I didn't need his acknowledgement. But I would take control of my life. And that meant showing him, once and for all, that I wasn't someone to be ignored. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I knew one thing. I was done being his backup plan. If he wanted me to disappear into the background, I would force him to take notice. I would show him that his little girl wasn't so little anymore. I was about to make sure that the next time he looked at me, it wouldn't be with indifference. It would be with regret. I spent the next few weeks simmering with a mix of anger and determination. I knew I needed to get a plan together, but I had to be smart about it. This wasn't about a spontaneous outburst or some petty act of rebellion. I needed to show Dad I was capable of so much more than he ever gave me credit for. I needed to make a statement so powerful that it would not only get his attention, but shake him to his core. The first thing I did was start digging. I didn't want to just rely on vague resentment or emotional outbursts. I needed something concrete, something I could use to dismantle everything my father had built, or at least expose the lies he'd been feeding everyone, including me. I knew the family business inside and out. I had spent countless hours there, doing the grunt work, learning the ropes. What I hadn't realized was how much I had picked up without even trying. The inner workings, the client relations, the financial structure. It was all there, right under my nose. I just had to put the pieces together. I started by looking through some old files Dad had left in his office. At first, it was just curious browsing. Company reports, old invoices, employee files. But then, I found something. It wasn't something I was meant to find. There, buried in the back of a file drawer, was a series of emails between Dad and a few high-level business partners. The conversations were casual at first, just about deals and projections. But as I read more, the tone shifted. There were mentions of strategic moves and phasing out certain employees. Names that I recognized, loyal employees, people who had been with the company for years, were being casually dismissed, their futures jeopardized for nothing more than a shift in management priorities. And then, buried in one of the later emails, was something that made my stomach turn. a long exchange about how Aaron would be taking over soon, how it was time to position him for success, and how they could make it all smoothly transition without any pushback. I felt sick to my core. This wasn't just about Aaron being the heir. This was a calculated, cold business decision that left people like me, and others, completely expendable. It was all about power, about making sure the family stayed in control, no matter the cost. But what really stuck out to me was one email in particular. It was a message from Dad to a colleague, and in it he mentioned how he had been holding off on bringing me into the fold because I wasn't ready, and how he wasn't sure I had the necessary leadership skills. The words were a slap to the face. The idea that all of my hard work, all the things I had done for the business, meant absolutely nothing. He didn't just not acknowledge my efforts. He actively disregarded my potential, as if I wasn't capable of anything beyond menial tasks. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. My father was never going to change. He would never see me as an equal. He had already chosen Aaron, and nothing was going to disrupt that. But I didn't have to accept it. In fact, I didn't have to accept anything. It was time to take back control, to take the reins of my own life, and maybe even the family business. I started doing the math. If I could somehow leverage these emails, these pieces of evidence, I could expose the way Dad had been running things. I didn't need to destroy the entire business. But I could make it so that he would have no choice but to admit that I was a force to be reckoned with. I could force him to face the fact that he'd been overlooking the wrong person this whole time. And then, something else clicked. Aaron was arrogant, sure, but he was also incredibly naive. He thought he had everything under control, that his position was untouchable. He had no idea what I was about to do. The truth was, he didn't know half of what was really going on in the company. He wasn't as savvy as he thought he was. In fact, he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life, one that would cost him everything. I began digging deeper into the company's financials, accessing reports, and tracking transactions. The deeper I went, the more I uncovered. Irregularities, poor investments, and shady dealings that Aaron was blind to. But the thing that really caught my attention was a string of questionable transactions between Dad's business and another company, one that Aaron had been particularly interested in for years. The same company he had been planning to partner with after taking over. The deal was risky, too risky, and there were signs that it might collapse under the wrong management. Now, I had everything I needed. I knew what Aaron was planning, and I had the ammunition to bring it all down. The question was, how do I use this information to turn the tide in my favor? I didn't want to just expose Aaron. That would be too easy, too obvious. No, I needed to make this a masterstroke, something that would not only expose his incompetence but also leave my father with no choice but to accept that I was the one who deserved to lead, not Aaron, not anyone else. I waited for the perfect moment, watching from the sidelines as Aaron continued to play his part, convinced he was untouchable. He had no idea I was watching his every move, no idea I had everything lined up, but when I did strike, it would be unforgettable. The moment finally arrived. I had everything in place, an arsenal of evidence, a clear understanding of what Aaron was doing, and most importantly, a plan that would make both him and my father pay attention in a way they never had before. It all came to a head at the company's annual strategy meeting. This was a big one. Dad was getting ready to announce his transition plan, officially handing over the business to Aaron. They had been planning it for months, and I knew that once Aaron was in charge, I would be nothing more than a forgotten footnote in the family history. I wasn't going to let that happen. This was my moment to show them all exactly what I was capable of. I showed up early that morning, dressed in a sharp suit that made me feel like I was stepping into a new version of myself. It was a simple thing, but it felt like a small act of defiance. The day wasn't going to be about Aaron and Dad's grand plans anymore. It was going to be about me. The room was buzzing with excitement as the board members trickled in, the air thick with the tension of change. As usual, Aaron was at the center of it all, greeting people with that charming, overconfident smile of his. He thought he had it all locked down. But what he didn't know was that I had already sent a detailed report to all the key players in the room, an anonymous email with copies of those incriminating financial reports, the emails about the shady business dealings, and the unspoken truth about how everything had been rigged for him to take control. I watched the reactions of the board members as they scanned the documents. There were whispers, stunned looks, and a few quiet gasps. I could feel the tension building. Aaron had no idea what was happening. He was still chatting about his vision for the future, going on and on about how things were going to change under his leadership. But with each passing minute, I could see that the room was growing quieter, the smiles fading. I had their attention now, and I could feel it. Then came the moment. Dad stood at the front, ready to make his speech. He was talking about his plans for the future, about how proud he was of Aaron, how he had always been the one to take over. The usual speech, nothing new, nothing surprising. But then, I stood up. I wasn't planning to make a scene, but there was no turning back now. I had to finish what I started. "Dad, can I speak for a moment?" I asked, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. The room went silent. I could feel Aaron's eyes on me, a mixture of confusion and annoyance. Dad paused, clearly surprised by my interruption, but he gestured for me to go ahead. I didn't waste time. "I'm sure you all remember the recent email that was sent out about the company's financials, the questionable investments, the deals that were made without proper oversight. Well, I'm the one who sent it." The room shifted uncomfortably, people exchanging glances. Aaron stood frozen, his face paling as he realized what I was saying. "I've been working here for years, watching everything happen, learning the ins and outs of the business," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "And I've seen the way things have been run, the way my father has chosen to favor Aaron, ignoring everything I've done for this company, disregarding my potential, while lining Aaron up to take over. It's not just unfair, it's dangerous." Aaron finally spoke, his voice shaky. "What the hell are you talking about? This is my company. Dad's made it clear I'm the one in charge." "No, Aaron," I said, cutting him off. "This isn't just your company, it's mine too, and I've had enough of being treated like a shadow." With a swift motion, I pulled out the financial reports and emails I'd discovered. I passed them around to the board members. "These are the transactions I'm talking about, the ones that have been hidden under the guise of business strategy. But they've been draining the company, putting it at risk. And you didn't even know about it, did you, Aaron?" Aaron's face was flushed with anger, but I could see the fear creeping in behind his bravado. This wasn't going how he expected. This wasn't the smooth transition he had anticipated. The board members were already murmuring, some looking at him with distrust. "You've been so busy planning your takeover," I said, my eyes locking with his, "that you missed the real problems. Problems that would have collapsed the company in a few months if no one stepped in. But now I'm here, and I'm not just some backup plan. I'm not someone you can push aside any longer." Dad was standing there, speechless, his face pale as he looked between me and Aaron. He had no idea how to respond. The truth was, he couldn't. He had been so blinded by his own desire to make Aaron the next big thing that he never stopped to ask if he was the right choice. And as the tension in the room reached its peak, I knew I had won. I had exposed Aaron's incompetence, exposed the lies, and taken control of my own destiny. I wasn't just going to be some background player in the family story. I was going to lead. "I'm not asking for your approval anymore," I said, finally turning to my father. "I'm telling you that I'm capable of running this company, just like anyone else. And if you don't believe that, then you're going to have to face the consequences of your choices." The room was still. Aaron was speechless. Dad looked like he had been hit by a truck. The fallout from that meeting was swift and unforgiving. Within days, the board had called an emergency session, and what followed was nothing short of a revolution within the company. Aaron, once the golden child, found himself in a corner, scrambling to justify his actions, trying to downplay the serious issues I'd uncovered. But it was too late. The evidence was damning, and the board wasn't as loyal to him as he'd thought. Dad was in a panic. He had spent years building the idea that Aaron was his successor, the one who would carry the family business to greater heights. But in a few short hours, that vision had crumbled. The truth had come out. Aaron wasn't the competent, capable leader everyone thought he was. He was just another young man with ambition and no understanding of how to run a business. The deal he had been so eager to push forward, the risky one I had uncovered, was cancelled. And with that, so was his reputation. I wasn't the one to gloat, not publicly anyway. But there was no denying that the power dynamics had shifted. I had made my mark. I had shown them all who I was. As the dust settled, I was given a seat at the table, literally. Dad, despite his hesitation, reluctantly offered me a leadership role in the company. He didn't admit it outright, but I could tell he realized that I wasn't just another backup plan anymore. I had proven I was more than capable. He knew it now, even if he didn't fully understand how he had overlooked me for so long. Aaron, on the other hand, didn't take it well. After a few failed attempts to salvage his position, he was quietly pushed aside. He wasn't fired per se, but his role was significantly reduced, and his involvement in the company became more of a formality than anything substantial. The charm and confidence that once defined him were gone, replaced by a quiet resentment. I don't think he ever truly forgave me, but at that point, I didn't care. His feelings were irrelevant to me now. Dad tried to reach out, tried to have those heart-to-heart conversations about how he always believed in me, how proud he was, now that things had changed. But I wasn't interested in his apologies. Words were meaningless at this point. He had made his choices. He had watched me struggle, watched me work hard for nothing. He had let me fade into the background for years. That wasn't something you could fix with a conversation. I focused on the business, on rebuilding the company, steering it away from the financial mess that had been brewing under Aaron's watch. My ideas, my strategies, they began to take shape, and they worked. Slowly but surely, I restored the trust of the board members. They began to see me as someone who could lead, not just as a capable employee, but as someone who could take the company into the future. And for Aaron? Well, I think he realized that the life he had been handed wasn't as secure as he had believed. When things began to unravel for him, I could see the cracks in his confidence. He had always relied on Dad's influence, on the idea that he was the chosen one. But the moment that facade cracked, he was left with nothing but bitterness and regret. For me, it was a different story. I thrived, not because I wanted revenge, but because I had earned it. I had earned my place in the world. Months passed, and the company began to flourish. As for me, I moved up, took on more responsibility, and eventually assumed a leadership role that no one had ever expected me to have. But here's the thing. I didn't do it to prove a point to anyone. I did it for me. For all those years I spent in the shadows, for every moment I had been told I wasn't good enough. I was the one in control now. And Dad? Well, he learned the hard way that a true legacy isn't built on favoritism. It's built on recognizing the potential in everyone, not just the ones you think you can mold into your image. And I think deep down he finally saw that. But by then it was too late for us to go back to what we once had. And I was okay with that. The last time I saw Aaron, he tried to plead with me. He wanted me to help him, to give him another chance. But I just looked at him and said, "You had your chance. You blew it." He walked away, knowing I wasn't going to be the one to fix his mistakes. As I sat in my new office overlooking the city skyline, I felt something I hadn't in years: peace. This was my victory, my redemption. And in that moment, I realized something. I hadn't just taken the spotlight. I had taken control of my own story, the story no one else thought I would ever get to write. I wasn't the forgotten daughter anymore. I wasn't just the backup plan. I was the one who had the power now, and I wasn't ever going to let it go.